Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to this video, guys. My name is Liaquat. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Today's lesson, we are going through the Mukhtasar al-Qudoori, and we have reached Bab Khiyar Shart. So if you guys are not familiar with my YouTube channel, please check out the videos I make. I make videos on helping you guys understand the Arabic language, Quran, Hadith, and other sciences that you might be interested in. Right, so without any delay, let's crack on with this then. So, Bab Khiyar Shart. So, Khiyar means an option. Okay, so Khiyar is option. Shart is condition. Khiyar الشرط جائز. جائز means permissible. في البيع للبائع والمشتري لهما الخيار. ثلاثة, 3. Khiyar means a choice. Yeah, so or option, we've done that actually already. Option, so not again. ثلاثة أيام فما دونها. دون means less, anything less than that. ولا يجوز أكثر من ذلك. أكثر means more. يجوز إذا سمى, it means to stipulate, so this word has come before as well. To stipulate. مدة, period. معلومة, known, a known period. خيار البيع. يمنع. يمنع means to stop, it prevents. خروج, it means to exit. المبيع, the goods. من ملكه, ownership. قبضه, it means take possession, to possess. المشتري فهلك means to perish. ضمنه, it means compensate. From the word ضمن يضمن, compensate. بالقيمة وخيار المشتري. So قيمة means market value. Market value. And خيار المشتري لا يمنع. خروج المبيع من ملك البائع, so does not stop. لا يملك وعندهما يملكه فإن هلك في يده. All these words are quite simple, straightforward. عيب means defect. The chapter of عيب is going to come later. ومن شرط له الخيار فله أن يفسخ means to void, to nullify. Okay, to void. في مدة الخيار وله أن يجيزه. أجاز يجيز, it means to permit. فإن أجازه بغير حضرة. حضرة means presence. صاحبه means the possessor, the owner. جاز, so it's considered to be permissible. جاز. وإن فسخ لم يجوز إلا أن يكون الآخر, the other, حاضرا, present. وإذا مات يموت, it means to die. من له الخيار بطل يبطل, it means to become void, another word for void. خياره ولم ينتقل. ينتقل, انتقل ينتقل, from the word نقل, which means to transfer. إلى ورثته. ورثة means, it's the plural of وارث, which means heir. Yeah. heir, inheritor. ومن باع عبدا على أنه خباز أو كاتب وجده. خباز means a baker, and كاتب means a writer, scribe. فوجده بخلافه, and he finds it to be other than that. وجده بخلافه. فالمشتري بالخيار إن شاء أخذه بجميع الثمن. أخذ يأخذ, جميع means all. ثمن وإن شاء ترك means to leave. And these are quite straightforward words, that's why I'm not really focusing too much on this at the moment. Alright, so that's done then. Let's have a look at the tarkeeb part of it. So again, tarkeeb is going to do a basic, really basic tarkeeb, just so that you guys just understand what's happening here. Alright, so the tarkeeb part of it then. So باب خيار الشرط. So هذا مبتدأ. خيار الشرط مبتدأ. جائز خبر. في البيع للبائع والمشتري ولهما الخيار مبتدأ مؤخر. لهما الخيار 3 أيام ظرف فما دونها ولا يجوز أكثر. It's غير منصرف, and it's a فاعل of يجوز. من ذلك عند أبي حنيفة. وقال أبو يوسف ومحمد رحمهم الله يجوز إذا سمى مدة معلومة موصوف صفة becomes the مفعول به. وخيار new sentence خيار البائع يمنع is the فعل. خروج المبيع is the مفعول به. من ملكه فإن قبضه المشتري again this is سكون because this is like قاضي. فهلك في يده ضامنه بالقيمة. وخيار المشتري new sentence خيار المشتري لا يمنع خروج المبيع من ملك البائع إلا أن المشتري لا يملكه عند أبي حنيفة وعندهما يملكه. فإن هلك في يده هلك بالثمن. وكذلك إن دخله عيب ومن شرط له الخيار فله أن يفسخ في مدة الخيار وله أن يجيزه. So this is because of أن takes a فتحة. فإن أجازه بغير حضرة صاحبه all that is considered to be مضاف إليه. جاز وإن فسخ لم يجوز. Okay, it's originally يجوز and then the jazm has given it that. إلا أن يكون الآخر حاضرا is the خبر of يكون الآخر is the اسم. وإذا مات من له الخيار باطل خياره فاعل. ولم ينتقل إلى ورثته. ومن باع عبدا على أنه خباز أو كاتب فوجده بخلاف مضاف ذلك is مضاف إليه. فالمشتري بالخيار إن شاء أخذه بجميع الثمن وإن شاء تركه. Okay, so that's basically the tarkib side done. Now let's have a look at the masail then. Alright, so let's have a look at what these masail are basically. Masail basically means, you know, the cases or the issues that are at hand. Right, so Babu Khiyar Shart. So basically, Khiyar Shart is where, let's say for example, like there's a guy and he is thinking about buying this washing machine from the seller, but he doesn't know how good the washing machine is. Like he's unsure. He's thinking to himself, shall I buy the washing machine? Is the washing machine going to be good for me? Can I have a few days test? So the Sharia has allowed a few days test. In fact, you can have up to 3 days to test whether you want to buy the item or not. So you got 3 days. Anything that happens to it in 3 days, obviously, then you're going to be responsible. But you've got 3 days to decide. Let's say, for example, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So let's say you bought it on Monday at 10 a.m. So you've got 1, 2, 3, Thursday, 10 a.m. You've got all that period of time to decide whether you want it or not. Then you have to make a decision. This is called Khiyar al-Shart. It's basically like you want to inspect it, you want to test the item out. And the whole story behind this shouldn't really be allowed in trade because it's kind of like unfair. One guy is getting this like free 3 days test and the other guy not really getting it. So it's a bit unfair. But the Prophet ﷺ, he allowed this because there was a companion. His name was Hibban bin Munqidh, right? So this guy Hibban bin Munqidh radiallahu anhu, he would get ripped off a lot when he was buying stuff. So he'd buy things and then he'd come home with goods and he didn't need them. So his family came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, look, you know, Hibban, he comes home with stuff that he's bought from the shop and then we really regret that he's bought them. Is there any way that, you know, you could put something in place so that it could protect him? The Prophet said, okay. He says, whenever Hibban goes to the markets, he just says to the people that I've got 3 days to decide whether I want it or not. So he does the ijab and the qabul, the offer and acceptance, but still he has 3 days to decide. Now these 3 days, right, you have to stipulate them in the contract. You can't just get them automatically. You have to say that you want them, all right? And this is both permissible for the buyer. So the buyer, he can ask for them, and also the seller can ask. Why would the seller want 3 days? Well, the seller might not be sure if he wants to sell the washing machine. He might be thinking about it. Shall I really sell it or not? Or shall I sell it to this guy? So he might be in 2 minds. So that's why he also has 3 days to decide whether he wants the item or not. Right? So the buyer can get it and the seller can get it. That's what this whole concept is all revolving around. So he says Khiyar Shart is jaiz, permitted, fil bay'i, for the seller and for the mushtari. Okay, so buyer and the seller. Okay, they both have the right. They can both take out the Khiyar Shart, or just one of them takes out the Khiyar Shart, or even no one takes out the Khiyar Shart. Now, how many days do they have? So he says, because of the hadith, lahuma al-khiyaru thalathata ayyam, they have a choice up to 3 days. Now look, remember what I said to you in the beginning. This technically should not be allowed. And the reason why it technically should not be allowed is because this is considered to be something which is unfair for the other party. But because the Prophet ﷺ allowed it, now that's fine now, because he has allowed it and it makes sense why it's allowed. Because there's a lot of people, you might buy a car and you want to drive it around for a day or two and you want to test out whether it's kind of like the car that you really wanted. So therefore it makes sense, you want to create trust between the buyer and the seller. So this is why the beautiful wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ, that you test it out for 3 days, and within 3 days usually you find out whether it's the thing that you want, right? And if you don't want it, you can give it back and you get a full refund. Okay, so he says for 3 days, ثلاثة أيام فما دونها, or anything less than, you want a 1 day test, you want a 2 day test, that's up to you. Right? You get this kind of like money back guarantee basically, right? Money back guarantee. Now, what about more than 3 days? According to Abu Hanifa, لا يجوز أكثر من ذلك. According to Abu Hanifa, you are not allowed to have more than 3 days. So more than 3 days is not permitted. Okay. عند أبي حنيفة, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. However, the Sahibain, قال أبو يوسف ومحمد, they say rahimahullah, they say you're allowed to have any period that you want so long as you stipulate it. Right? So يجوز إذا سمى مدة معلومة, so long as a stipulated period has been mentioned. So for example, let's say the guy says, remember, 3 days is Abu Hanifa's opinion. The other one is, let's say he says, I want 10 days to decide. Right? They say it's fine. 10 days. Even though the hadith only said 3. They're saying, well, did the Prophet ﷺ really mean 3 as in you can't go above 3? So they're saying, not necessarily. In fact, we even have a report from Ibn Umar, radiallahu anhu, Ibn Umar, who actually took out a 2-month khiyar. So that kind of shows that it was permitted. Taking out a khiyar more than 3 days was something that was considered to be permitted. So يجوز إذا سمى مدة معلومة. مدة معلوم means a specific time period. In fact, interesting thing is, I don't know if you know about the Majallat al-Ahkam al-Adaliyya, which was like an official government book of maxims that was written for the Ottoman Empire. It was only about 200 years ago, and they have actually given fatwa on the Abu Yusuf and Muhammad's qawl. And this is because nowadays some people buy machinery that actually takes more than 3 days to really test out. Right, these big massive machines or big massive ships that would require more than 3 days to test it out. Anyway, that's a bit interesting point. Let's move on then. Okay, now let's say, for example, this is the buyer. So let's write this again then. So buyer over here and seller. Right, so look how nice it is when you can see the lesson, isn't it? I really like visual. I'm a visual person. I like seeing things, and then my understanding works better when I can see what the teacher's talking about. Are you guys like that as well? If you're like that, let me know in the comments. Now, let's say, for example, the seller was to take khiyar. Okay, so in this case, seller has taken khiyar, put a star there. So if he takes a khiyar, that means the goods that he has, let's say, for example, he's got a washing machine. Okay, so he's got a washing machine and he's going to give him a bunch of cash. So if now the seller, he takes the khiyar, yeah? So what happens over here? So basically what happens is the goods are not going to leave his ownership. They're going to stay with him, right? So they're not going to leave his ownership. The goods stay with him. The washing machine stays with him. And what's the result of this then? So he said the result of this is basically that the item now goes into the possession. So if the seller takes possession of this, takes it home basically, within the 3 days, right? So let's say, for example, within the 3 day period, any damages that are incurred, so anything that happens to the washing machine in those days, then this buyer will have to pay the market value, right? So he's going to pay the market value. Why does he pay the market value and not the agreed upon value, which was 200? Because the goods are basically are not agreed upon. It's not 100% gone through the transaction. Ijab and qabul has been done, but it hasn't 100% gone through. All right. So washing machine stays with seller, and the buyer doesn't really kind of get that. Right. It doesn't get the full ownership of it yet, but he gets possession of it. So this is why he says, وَخِيَارُ الْبَائِعِ, when the seller takes khiyar, it prevents the item, the mabi', from leaving min milkihi, from his ownership. فَإِنْ قَبَضَهُ الْمُشْتَرِي, and if the mushtari was to take possession of it, so mushtari here takes possession, فَهَلَكَ, and was by chance to get damage, destroyed, فِي يَدِهِ ضَمِنَهُ, then the mushtari has to pay the qima, the market value. Right, so we said market value. Okay, this is because the seller has taken the khiyar. Okay, what about the other way around then? So what if the buyer was to take the khiyar? Okay, so buyer takes the khiyar. How does this work out then? So in this case, if the buyer takes the khiyar, let's draw this out again then. So buyer and seller. The buyer takes the khiyar this time. He's got the khiyar. And again, washing machine over here, the beautiful washing machine. So if the buyer takes the khiyar, that means that the washing machine is going to go into the ownership of the buyer, isn't it? Yeah, the washing machine is going to go into the ownership of the buyer. But there's a problem there, yeah, which is if it goes into the ownership of the buyer and the buyer has got the cash as well, right? So he's got the cash as well. That means that there's going to be two things that this guy has. So what has to happen over here is, Imam Hanifa says, well, oh, actually, I should have left that, shouldn't I? All right, let me just rub this out. So what Imam Hanifa rahimahullah comes out with, the solution is, he says, therefore, what we say is that the seller is not the owner of it. The ownership is hanging in mid-air. The seller is not the owner, the buyer is not the owner. Why do we do this for? So that there isn't unfairness on both sides. So the item is not owned by the buyer and the seller. So he says, وَخِيَارُ الْمُشْتَرِي, the khiyar of the mushtari, which is the buyer, لَا يَمْنَعْ, doesn't stop the item mabi' from leaving the ownership of the seller, right? So the seller over here. إِلَّا, however, أَنَّ الْمُشْتَرِي, that the mushtari لَا يَمْلِكُهُ, does not become the full owner of it in the Abi Hanifa. So who owns it then? It stays in mid-air. This is the Abu Hanifa's solution for this. Sahibain, they say no. They say any transaction that takes place, the goods are automatically always transferred. Just like in the previous one. Yeah, washing machine was transferred to the buyer. He says exactly the same thing happens here. Washing machine is transferred to the buyer. Right? So they say the unfairness isn't really unfair. That he's got cash and he's got the washing machine as well. Because legally, that isn't really going to cause any problem here. So they say, وَعِنْدَهُمَا, according to Sahibain, يَمْلِكُهُ, that the buyer will actually own it. Alright? So what's the result then? In halaka, if the washing machine was to get damaged, fi yadihi, in the hands of the buyer, in the hands of the seller rather, the buyer, mushtari, halaka bithamani, it will be destroyed in exchange for the agreed upon value. So agreed upon value was £200, let's say. So when it gets destroyed, if it does get destroyed, the deal is kind of done basically, because remember, the transactions are always revolve around the goods rather than the cash. So therefore, this item gets destroyed, and it's as though the item has now done its job, right? So he has to pay the guy cash, and that's it. So that's the difference between if the seller takes khiyar, the item doesn't leave his ownership because he's not really happy with it leaving his ownership. But if the buyer was to take khiyar, the item, according to Sahibain, does leave his ownership and enters into the buyer's ownership. And Abu Hanifa says no, it stays pending, hanging between the seller and the buyer until the 3 days is over. Okay, now what if a defect, a fault comes into it within these 3 days? Yeah, so in these 3 days, some sort of fault comes into it. So he says, وَكَذَلِكَ, likewise, إِن دَخَلَهُ عَيْبٌ, in these 3 days, if a fault comes in there, like for instance, he damages it, so he hasn't totally destroyed it, he's broken the glass on it or something, or he's damaged the wire or a part inside or whatever, then in that case, he also has to pay the thaman as well. Right? So that's all he wants to explain over there. Right, next. Now, if a person has taken khiyar, let's move over here. If a person has taken khiyar, then what happens to his rights then? So let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, this guy is the buyer and he's the seller. And the buyer, let's say the buyer has taken khiyar, okay? The buyer has taken khiyar. So he has 3 days, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So, he has the 3 days from there all the way up to there. He's got 3 days. Within 3 days, he has the choice to nullify the contract, or he can accept it. So he's got like a choice. So he either accepts, so accept, or reject. I don't want it. So he's got that choice. If he accepts it, does he need to inform the seller? Right? Does he need to inform the seller and say, yes, I've accepted it, right? Or not? So the rule is that no, he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to tell him. Basically, he can be absent because the default is that he's accepted it. So if 3 days goes by, he doesn't have to tell the person because he's accepted it. But what if he rejects it? What about if he rejects it? Does he have to tell the seller? So yes. So he has to within the 3 days. Within the 3 days, he must inform the seller that he doesn't want it. If 3 days goes by and the seller has not been informed, he has to buy the item. Right? He lost that shart. So man sharata lahu al-khiyara, or shurita lahu al-khiyar, you can say. Whoever has taken out the khiyar for themselves, falahu, then that person, in this case, let's say it's the buyer, it could be the seller as well, yafsukh, he can nullify the contract fi muddatil khiyar, in the period of khiyar. And walahu, and he has a right, and yujizahu, ajaza yujizu means to allow it. Fain ajazahu, and if he allows it, bighayri hadrati sahibihi, without the presence of its original owner, jaza is jais. Wa in fasakha, however, if he voids it, lam yajuz, it's not permitted, illa an yakuna, unless the other person is hadir, right? So like we said, the other person has to be present in order for this contract to be considered to be valid. All right, that's mas'ala's done. Next mas'ala now. Right, the next mas'ala is basically to do with what would happen if this guy has died. Let's go over here. So let's say within these 3 days, this guy, unfortunately, the buyer, he dies on Tuesday. Right, he dies on Tuesday. So now his heirs, right, let's say his children, they have found out about this. All right, his children and wife found out about this. Do they get the choice to carry on? Meaning, can they also make the choice of acceptance or rejection? Do they get that choice? No. Heirs do not inherit the right of khiyar. Just remember that. So man ma idha mata. So when he dies, man, the one for who the khiyar is, batala khiyaruhu, his khiyar drops and the sale goes through. If the khiyar drops, that means the sale has gone through. Walam yantaqil, and it does not transfer to his heirs. Okay, so it does not go down to his heirs. Sorry about that. It doesn't go to his heirs so that they can make a choice. Okay, that masala is finished. Now, final masala. Although this isn't really to do with khiyar, it's just kind of brought as a precursor to the next chapter, which is to do with ru'ya. Right? So he says, Man ba'a abdan. Let's say, for example, someone has purchased a slave. Okay, so let's say this is the buyer, this is the seller, and he has purchased a slave. This is the slave. Okay, let's call this slave. And he's purchased the slave on the condition, thinking that this slave was a baker, or a writer. A baker. He had a skill of writing or baking. So that's why he bought the slave for, let's say, I don't know, £2,000, thinking that, you know what, this is going to be a baker. I can take him home and he can bake cakes for me or for my business. Then he goes home and finds out that he's not a baker, or he's not a writer. What happens in this case? So in this case, this guy now is going to have a choice now. He's given a choice. Right? What's the choice? The choice is either keep the slave for the full value, so keep it for 2k, or you get a full refund. Give the slave back, get a full refund. Right? So what he can't do is he can't get a partial refund. He can't say, look, from the 2,000, cut off 500, minus 500 because he's not a writer. I want 500 back. No, he can't do that. The reason why he can't do that is because the skill of writing or the skill of baking was not itemized on the list. It wasn't given a value. And if it's not given a value, you can't assume as part of the total that the writing is equal to this much percent of the value, or this much, this many pounds. Does that understand? So, وَمَنْ بَاعَ عَبْدًا, whoever sells a slave, ala, on the condition أَنَّهُ خَبَّازٌ, that he was supposed to be a baker, أو كاتب, or that he was a writer, scribe, فَوَجَدَهُ, and he finds it to be بِخِلَافِ ذَلِكَ, as opposed to that, like he's not. فَالْمُشْتَرِي, in that case, بِالْخِيَارِ, the mushtari in this case is the buyer. إِنْ شَاءَ, if he wishes, أَخَذَهُ بِجَمِيعِ الثَّمَنِ, he can take the slave for the full price. وَإِنْ شَاءَ تَرَكَ, and if he wants, he can leave it totally, right? Give it back, get its full. Leave it means get a full refund. Does everyone understand that? So this is for anything, by the way, that you buy. If you buy anything and you find the item not as described, you can't get a partial refund from the, legally you can't. If the seller obviously wants to give you a deduction and give you some money back, that's up to him. But legally, he doesn't have to do that. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, and this applies to anything out there. You buy a laptop and the laptop's supposed to be, I don't know, a memory of 1000 terabytes, and you bring it home and it's actually 512 terabytes, or 512 gigabytes, then you can't go to him and say, look, I want some money back because you promised this. No, unless in the itemization he said, what do you want? A 512 one costs this much and a 1 terabyte one costs this much. In that case, you can possibly get back a partial refund depending on the value of the item. Okay. And that's it, basically. All right, so let's go through this. Let's ask you some questions then. Okay, first question. Question number 1. What is Khiyar Shart? Tell me what Khiyar Shart is. Put it in the comments. And then listen to the answers. Okay, so Khiyar Shart is, or you can pause it. Khiyar Shart is where a person, whether it's the buyer or the seller, takes out a 3-day sort of like testing period. All right? And if they're happy with it, they keep it. If they're not happy, they give it back. What does the Sahibain say? Do they agree with 3 days? Pause it. The answer is no. They say you can have any period you want so long as it's a mudda ma'luma, as long as it's a specified period. Okay, next question. If the seller takes out khiyar, does the item leave his ownership, and why? So we say no, the item does not leave his ownership because the whole point of him taking the khiyar was that he wasn't happy with the item leaving his ownership. And what happens if the buyer was to damage the goods? If he damages the goods, he gives the market value. Okay, next question. What happens if the buyer was to take the khiyar? So in this case, there's an ikhtilaf. According to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he says that no one owns it. And according to the Sahibain, they say the buyer owns it. So therefore, if the buyer was to damage it, he would have to give the thaman, right? He would have to give the full price. Okay, and the same goes for if a fault came into it. Yeah, so it didn't fully damage, it was like 20% damage, 30% damage. Okay, so if a person has taken khiyar, like to say the buyer takes khiyar, and he's got 3 days now, can he accept the item without informing the seller that he wants the item, or does he have to inform him? No, he doesn't have to inform him. Okay, what if he wants to nullify the contract? He wants to give the item back, get a full refund. Does he have to inform the guy? Yes, he has to within 3 days. If he delays it after 3 days, after 72 hours, he loses his right. Next question. Does khiyar shart, is it inherited? We say no, it's not inherited because this is a right and rights are not inherited. And finally, what if a person buys something with the specifications that were promised and then he finds out that some of those specifications are not there? Does he get a right of partial refund? No, he doesn't. He gets either a full refund or he keeps the item for the full value. And that's it, guys. So Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for watching this video, guys. I really appreciate you guys taking out the time to watch the whole video. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting my channel. It means a lot to me, honestly, that you guys support my channel. May Allah reward all of you guys. If any of you guys want to really become supporters of my channel and want to become helpers, then please consider becoming donors of the channel. It helps me a lot. I can make these videos. I can take out time. I can, purchase software and the hardware and the subscriptions I have to for these videos because it takes a lot of time to actually prepare one video sometimes. So consider it. Check out the description below, and I will see you guys next time. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.